Thank you for taking the time to watch this episode of Life Support. If you enjoy the content, we would ask that you like it, hit subscribe, and share it with your friends. It's so glad to see you on Life Support. This program is unique in a way. We want to talk about trauma, struggles. We want to encourage you that Jesus is with you, and many times this is when the Lord makes himself the most available, when we come to him and we're broken. We're coming to you live from Orlando, Florida. This is the Waymaker World Conference sponsored by the American Association of Christian Counselors, and we're surrounded by mental health professionals here that really want to lead people toward Christ and help. My guest is Dr. Mark Mayfield. He's a licensed therapist, and he is the author of a book called The Path Out of Loneliness. Thank you for being here, Mark.
Yeah, thanks for having me again.
Path Out of Loneliness is an intriguing title because loneliness isn't something that just naturally rises to the surface. And we talked a little bit about how it is affecting the church and how COVID has affected the church last time. But I'm most concerned about pastors because I am one.
Yep.
And I see pastors carrying a tremendous amount of weight. And they don't know what to do because we haven't been trained for a pandemic. Mm-hmm. But yet everybody's calling and going, what do I do? And the line battleground I see is the vaccination.
Yeah.
I have people calling me and they're saying, can you give me some counsel on should I not? My company wants me to, and it's very confusing. Tell me what you're seeing in the pastoral world and what's happening to pastors right now.
Well, I think it's interesting to see. We've just kind of just seen the trend. I don't think before COVID, we've seen the trend of pastors burning out, thinking they have to carry the world on their shoulders, that they can't have a moment of struggle or of vulnerability, because that would lead to whatever. We've seen pastors leaving their faith. We've seen moral failures, sadly some suicides over the last couple of years. I think that the COVID pandemic has probably done two things. It's either increased that kind of keeping it to myself, not engaging in those kinds of things, or it's creating an opportunity for pastors to start asking for help, right? So I think it's not a one way or the other. It's kind of a both and that we're seeing. At least I'm seeing.
So you go into churches and you help and you coach,
mm-hmm.
and so I'm going to appeal to board members right now.
Sure.
Because I think that pastors are in a very difficult situation because they know what they're experiencing. They read articles about what other pastors are experiencing. We see it all over the place. And so we kind of feel like we're not alone in that regard.
Right.
But I think a lot of pastors experience boards that hardly even acknowledge there's a pandemic and want everything to just kind of kick back into gear. And
yeah.
I don't think it's going to work that way.
No, we can't keep our heads in the sand. And so if I'm appealing to elder boards or just deacon boards or whatever, I think we have to invest in the outcome of what we want for our church. And part of that is how do we invest in our pastor? I have the privilege in a couple weeks of speaking at a pastors conference at the Navigators headquarters in Colorado Springs, Glen Erie. Would love, and I think it's a 3-day event, but it's in Colorado Springs, it's, mountains, it's Glen Erie. Like giving you a chance for a pastor to get away and not be having to be needed, I think is so important. But even kind of creating that rhythm for them throughout the daily grind. And so whether that's having the church invest in pastoral coaching or pastoral counseling, I think, or just getting the pastor counseling, period, I think is really important. Because I think the pastor needs somebody that they can be completely honest with and have it be confidential and not be job dependent. I think is a big deal.
Yeah, job dependent. That is a big deal.
Well, and I think it needs to be covered by the church,
mm-hmm.
right? I mean, I think that needs to be investment that the church takes to go, okay, I value you and your ministry, so I'm going to sow into that by saying we'll cover your counseling. We'll pay for somebody to come out and do some coaching or some trainings for the team to really reset or set up or whatever that looks like, and that investment piece, because I think we can't not invest in that.
Do you find that pastors are struggling with loneliness at a deep level right now?
Oh, huge. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, I wrote an article for Outreach Magazine recently, and the working title, I'm not sure what they decided yet, but the working title is Lonely at the Top, ... And I challenge that notion, that lie that it's lonely at the top. I think we self-isolate as CEOs or as pastors, in that place of it's lonely at the top, I have nobody to talk to. I think it's just we're buying into the lie that if we talk to somebody, something's going to happen, or we're going to lose our job, or we're going to, and I think there's those, just that theme that is permeating the senior leadership staff, that I'm just, it's just the way it is. I'm lonely at the top. No, you don't have to be. I think that's a big fallacy.
But I think I fall into that trap, and you've been a pastor, and I think where the fallacy is, and where my own thinking is wrong many times, is that I'm just fearful. And Scripture's pretty clear that fear and my relationship with Christ necessarily don't go hand in hand. Here's what I'm afraid of. I'm afraid of disappointing people. I'm afraid of something I say being taken out of context and spreading throughout the church. And ultimately, I'm afraid of a board looking at me and saying, yeah, no, you don't fit here anymore. The lie is that God isn't going to take care of me.
Right.
Because he is. Why should I be afraid? A professor once told me, it's great to get fired at a church because then you can go do something you really want to.
Right.
But I forget that very often.
Well, I think, too, it's going back to, Paul in Galatians, like, who am I here to serve, right? Am I serving man or am I serving God? And I think I don't know why it is, and this is maybe another conversation for a different time, too, but why is it that we even place ourselves on pedestals?
Yeah.
Where we're not, where we're above X, Y, and Z, or the elder board or the boards put us upon pedestals that we have to be a certain way. And like you said, it's sometimes it's the best thing to stir up the pot a little bit, and you're going to disappoint people. I always tell my clients this, like, what's the worst that can happen? Let's go down that path for a minute. Like, let's say you get something taken out of context. What's the worst that can happen? And then let's talk about, will you be okay? And usually, most often, like, oh, yeah, that would hurt, that would stink, but I'd be fine.
Yeah.
But we get so caught up in our minds and our heads that we...
I think there's a lot of pride there that
Sure.
I don't want to admit. And I think there's a lot of self-protection going on that is easy to wrap up in the hey, I'm a pastor, so I can't have friends, I can't tell anybody anything. And there's a certain amount of victim kind of mentality wrapped up in that
Sure.
I find, and I think, I know I'm guilty of that many times. I'm not very good at reaching out and grabbing relationships. I've been wounded. I've been hurt by people.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing is there's a different level of discernment and wisdom that a pastor has to take when we do seek out relationships. And I think a lot of times it can be nerve-wracking for a pastor to bring somebody close because they're afraid that could be turned against them. And so, I think if pastors are listening to this and they are wounded, I mean, sometimes the best thing you can do is go find a spiritual advisor, go find a coach or a counselor that, in some ways it's a paid relationship, but really those of us in the field, it's not a paid relationship. Like it's our calling to help support you.
Yeah.
And where there's an exchange of money, but the genuineness of the relationship is there.
Yeah.
But there's also that confidentiality, and that's a lot of times can begin to repair some of those wounded patterns.
So we're talking about loneliness with Dr. Mark Mayfield. The Path Out of Loneliness is the book. And Mark, we just have a few minutes left. And we talked in the first time that we were together about what COVID is doing to all of us. Yeah. And in the church itself, churches are sort of, as I look, are kind of trying to reboot. How difficult is it going to be to retrain ourselves to get back into relationships when we have been told for a year and a half, don't go near anybody?
Right. It's an uphill battle. I think it's going to continue to be an uphill battle. I think, though, we just have to make our mind up that we're going to do it. And I think, obviously, wisely. I'm not saying, throw off all caution, but we have to have some wisdom in there.
Well, I have the green band on, which is I can hug people.
Yeah, I did too, but I took it off today. But but I think it's, we have to make up our mind that we're going to engage and enter in, and that we have to push past that fear. I think there's going to be a lot of fear that's going to go with it. But here's the thing. I think the alternative is worse, right? And I talk about in the book that we can't silo mind, body, spirit. right? I mean, if we're created in the image of the triune God, right? Let us make man in our image. We represent the triune nature of God, mind, body, and spirit. And if we are not taking care of the health of one of those areas, the other ones are going to fail. And I see so much of that in that the mind and body connection, where relationship, and in the spirit connection too. Relationship, I think, is kind of that covering over all three of them. And if we're not finding ways to engage in healthy relationships, healthy connection, whether that be with our immediate family, our household, our extended family, or people in the church or around us, the three that are under that umbrella are going to start suffering.
Yeah, and then what are the consequences when they start to suffer? What happens?
Well, you think about even just an uptick in our cortisol hormone, which is our stress hormone, just an uptick in our cortisol hormone, whether that's triggered by a trauma. You think about water dripping on a rock over time, it's going to wear the rock away. Well, the rock is our immune system, and over time, when we have our stress hormones elevated, which are actually mitigated by healthy, safe relationships, those stress hormones come down. If they're elevated over time, it's going to wear away at our immune system, and it's going to affect our ability to fight off infection and disease. And
See, nobody talks about that.
No, we don't.
That's the first time I've ever heard that.
Yeah, we don't talk about it.
Yeah.
And it's, I think, and I'll make this statement, I talk about it more in the book, but that our relational health or ill health is a direct correlation to our physical health. And ill relational health is a pre-disease pathway to sickness.
Wow. And biblically speaking, we are to take care of ourselves, or our bodies are a temple of the Holy Spirit. Right. So you're saying it's not about going out and running only. It's about finding relationships to supplement all that.
Yeah, I had a friend of a friend of a friend, if you could follow that trail for a second, but that was a triathlete, and he died of a heart attack.
Wow.
And they were all going, what happened? Why? He ate well, he was working out all the time, but if you zoom out, wife left him, kids aren't speaking to him, no community, no relationship, and we know that the constriction of our blood flow in our veins really is can be linked to stress in relationships as well. And so some pre-disease pathways that we're kind of linked to. Now, again, I can't say that for certain.
Sure.
Right? But just an observation from what I've studied and what I know, there was more to that than just his physical health. And so it's not just all about physical health. It's about holistic health.
It's almost as if God planned it that way.
Go figure.
And here's the other thing, and this isn't really along the lines of a professional comment, but if we are lonely and isolated, we are likely not advancing the gospel.
Oh gosh, no.
Right?
Yeah.
And isn't that part of emotional health too? When you're out there, and whatever your sphere of influence is, and I'm not saying you have to be out in the street with a sign, but isn't that important to our emotional health too, fulfilling a calling that God has given us?
Well, yeah, let me read a quote that I actually from my book. I just posted this on social media. And
by the way, the book is called A Path Out of Loneliness. It's Nav Press, available now.
So I said loneliness directly decreases spiritual health and relational community because it's a blatant repurposing of the original lie. Without community rooted in the gospel, we lose the ability to recognize truth.
Oh, that's good. Really good. I'm going to read your book because I think I might learn something. But, I mean, you're right on it there. And one thing I am concerned about in churches right now is everyone's so consumed with the political aspects of what's going on in our country. And, I mean, they actually walk around the church lobby with Facebook articles for people to look at. They'll come up to me and show me videos. Mm-hmm. And I'm going, wait a minute. Like, from the pulpit, I'll say, people every day are deciding if they're going to follow Christ or not. Their eternal destinies are still at stake, whether there's a pandemic or not.
Right. Absolutely.
And it's like everybody's checked out.
Yeah.
Can't do that.
And we get so caught up, like we were talking about earlier, in should I get the vaccine? Should I wear a mask? And I'm like, it's not about the vaccine or a mask, in my opinion. It's about how am I caring for my brother and sister. And if I'm going to engage in the ministry and the work of Jesus Christ, what am I willing to do in order to care for my brother and sister? Now, I'm not taking a stance against or for any of those things. And I don't think it's about being for or against any of those things. I think it's about it's about God's economy. And it's about the kingdom of Christ. And it's like, so what, like one of the things I've gone to come to the conclusion, I'm doing a lot more traveling. If I'm going to do a lot more traveling, I'm going to protect myself and my family and those around me. And so here's my decision. I'm not going to say what that is right now, but here's what I've decided to do based on what God has called me to do. And so if we can take a step back and go, well, it's about government conspiracy. No, it's not about any of that kind of stuff. It's still about God's economy. That hasn't changed. That won't change. And we need to stay focused on that.
Yeah, personal liberty and health is not the number one concern for the Christian. And I don't want to shame anybody. Sure. We all have our decisions to make, but I mean, it's gotten to the point where I'm afraid to tell people in my church I've been vaccinated. Because I'm afraid half the church is going to come after me.
Right.
And it shouldn't be that way. What we should be doing is, hey, I noticed that you're struggling with that mask there. Are you concerned? Yeah, I'm struggling to get back to church. Well, how about I put a mask on too?
Yeah.
To support you. I don't think personal liberty is really the number one thing. And I know people are going to get mad at me. They're probably throwing things at the radio right now. But we've got to get back to the basics. We are called to make disciples. We're not called to stand up for liberty. We're called to make disciples. Number one.
Yeah.
Period.
Yeah.
And I just long for the church to get back to that. And I think for pastors that are struggling too, just to refocus your mind on, okay, let's just put all this stuff away and get back to our calling.
Absolutely, 100%.
But it's hard to do.
It is, because again, like you said, that there's the theme of fear. It's just permeating there. So I think my biggest encouragement is just for pastors right now is just find somebody that you can trust to talk to and process this stuff with, because that's going to pull you out of your own loneliness.
Yeah, and where would someone find a counselor? Like a pastor's listening right now, and he's going like, "This is all new to me. How would I even find a person to talk to?"
So Steve Arterburn at New Life Ministries has a great pastoral Christian counseling list, probably the most comprehensive Christian counseling list in the country. So check out New Life Ministries. Focus on the Family's got a great pastoral counseling list. You can call in to Focus on the Family and talk to one of their counselors on over the phone. They can get you connected with somebody in your area. But I think, my hope is that the churches in the area too would begin to partner with like-minded Christian counselors as well, and have a list around that as well. For me, I'm in my community. I'm fairly well known with what I do, and so I've chosen to find a counselor outside of my community. I drive about 45 minutes to find just because I know too many counselors in my area. And so sometimes as a pastor, it might be more comfortable to do some teletherapy with somebody from a different town, or drive 45 minutes. There's something cathartic about a 45-minute drive, listening to the radio on the way to see a counselor. So it doesn't have to be in your community, especially if you're in a small community.
Yeah, I highly recommend it, because that's one place a pastor can go, and you don't have to worry about confidentiality. No. You can spill your guts. And no one's going to shame you, and there's no shame in asking for help. Yep. And cities and counties also have excellent resources too that are accessible, and they may not be on the Christian website, but they're there to help as well. Yeah. And they may have specific people that can help you in your area of need. All right, tell me about The Path Out of Loneliness. It's a new book.
Yep.
On sale right now.
Yep.
What are you saying in the book?
I lay it out from a part 1, part 2, part 3 perspective. Part 1, I lay the foundation of kind of the problem, and what I see, the contributors to loneliness, and kind of, I think we always got to start with the problem. And then part 2, I really dive into kind of the neurobiological, physiological, relational intent of how God designed it. So I try not to get too technical, but you get a little crash course in neurobiology, which is kind of fun. And then practically, at the end of part 3, I talk through our personal responsibility, meaning what do I need to do for me? Then I talk about the individual responsibility. What do I need to do for others? And then I talk about the church's responsibility. What do we need to do for others? And I give some practical tools. I've ruffled some feathers because it's not a 2 + 2 = 4 formula. Every church culture is going to be different. Every family culture is going to be different. I give suggestions. I give ideas. I give some steps, right, on this path out of loneliness. But the way that you engage it might be different than me. But I think if we are all intentional about engaging this path, we'll be able to walk with others out of it. And
what a time to write a book about loneliness.
Right.
So God must have known something.
Just maybe, yeah. Just along for the journey.
But it is encouraging, Mark, because it does show that God is still with us in this pandemic, and He's raising up leaders like yourself. that we need when, pastors need guys like you. Just anybody that's going through this pandemic needs guys like you.
Yeah.
So thanks for writing the book.
I appreciate it.
And where can I get it?
Amazon. You can get it on Barnes & Noble, Christian Booksellers, Nav Press, Tyndale. You can also get a link on my website, drmayfield.com as well.
All right. I know you're headed to Disneyland because we're in Orlando. Have a great time.
Thank you.
And you can actually think about other things besides work.
I'm going to enjoy all of it.
Like how much money you're spending.
That's the biggest one. No, put that aside. We're going to say yes to a lot of things today.